All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about the absolute first step in any security assessment, subdomain enumeration. Think of it like this. It's the Reconnaissance mission. It's all about drawing a complete map of your target's digital footprint before you even think about launching an attack. So, let's get started. So, picture this. You've been asked to test a system's security. You're staring at this massive, sprawling digital landscape, and you know there are hidden doors, forgotten entryways, all sorts of weaknesses. But where do you even start? It's a huge question, right? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. You don't start by looking for the doors. You start by drawing the map. You start by making that map. And that's exactly what subdomain enumeration is. It's the whole process of finding every single valid subdomain for a given domain. You know, things like api.example.com, dev.example.com, maybe even internal.example.com. This is how we take a totally unknown digital territory and turn it into a detailed map that we can actually use. And look, every good mission needs a solid plan, right? So here's our 6-step recon plan. It's our roadmap. We kick things off with getting authorization, super important. Then we move into passive discovery, then active enumeration. After that, it's all about consolidating, validating, and triaging what we found. And of course, documenting everything. You follow these steps, you're going to have a really complete picture.
Okay, let's jump into phase 1, the silent search. The key here is stealth. We are gathering intelligence from public sources without ever sending a single packet directly to our target systems. We're basically digital detectives at this point, just looking for clues that are already out there in the open.
Now, it's really crucial to understand the two main approaches here. Passive discovery is all about observation from a distance, using public records without the target ever knowing you're even looking. Active discovery, which we'll get to in a bit, that's when you're directly knocking on their digital doors. But for now, we're ghosts.
So, where do we find these public clues? Well, we start with things like certificate transparency logs on sites like crete.shell. These are an absolute goldmine, revealing subdomains every single time a company creates a secure web connection. We also dig through security datasets in web archives. It's kind of like the digital version of sifting through old public library records. Next up, we consult our digital informants. This means using clever Google searches, what we call dorks, to find indexed subdomains. We can also scan public code on GitHub for any accidental leaks. And of course, we can use automated tools like AMAS to do all of this open source intelligence, or OSINT, gathering for us. All right, so we've gathered all the intel we can without making a peep. Now it's time to shift gears. Phase 2 is the active probe. We're moving from just watching to directly interacting with our target. And this requires precision, and even more importantly, permission. And let me be perfectly crystal clear about the most important rule of this phase. Do not do this without explicit written authorization. This is the bright red line between legitimate security testing and an illegal scan. You have to get permission first. Always.
So what are we actually doing here? Well, active techniques involve sending queries directly to the target's own DNS servers. We're basically asking them questions like, hey, does dev-api.example.com exist? We're not observing from afar anymore. We are actively poking their infrastructure.
We can ask these questions in a few different ways. We can brute force common words from a list. Or we can try to find a DNS zone transfer, which is like this rare jackpot where a misconfigured server just hands over its entire list of subdomains. We also get creative with something called permutation fuzzing, automatically trying variations like api.v2 or dev-api to find those hidden assets. And while we're probing, we're also on the hunt for a particularly nasty vulnerability, the subdomain takeover. This happens when a subdomain points to a cloud service, like on AWS or Azure, but the resource it's pointing to has been deleted. An attacker can then just claim that dangling address and hijack the subdomain. It's a huge deal and a critical find.
You know, you can't really conduct an investigation without the right gear. So let's take a look at the digital toolkit that pretty much every security pro uses for this kind of reconnaissance work. These are the tools of the trade, totally battle-tested.
So our arsenal usually starts with a MAS, which is a total powerhouse for both passive and active discovery. For just pure speed and passive collection, we'll use Subfinder. Then we've got the utilities, DNX to validate which domains are actually live, HTTPX to probe for web services, and Aquatone to take screenshots, which gives us a really quick visual overview of all our targets.
But you have to remember, these tools are only as good as the data you feed them. For brute forcing, high-quality word lists are absolutely essential. Projects like setlists give us these massive dictionaries of common subdomain names, and that makes our active probing way more effective.
Okay, we've run our tools, we've gathered clues from all over the internet. Now comes the most important part, making sense of it all. We have to connect the dots and turn this giant mountain of raw data into actual, actionable intelligence.
So after running our passive and active scans, it's not weird at all to end up with a number that looks something like this: thousands and thousands of potential subdomains. This is the raw output of our investigation, and frankly, it's a lot of noise.
And that brings us to the big question, right? A list of almost 5,000 names is pretty useless on its own. How do we filter this down? How do we figure out which of these are live, which ones are interesting, and which ones might represent the biggest risk or the best entry point for more testing?
To cut through all that noise, we've got a clear plan. First, you consolidate everything and get rid of all the duplicates. Next, you validate what's actually live using tools like DNX and HTTPX. Then, you triage your findings, prioritizing the most interesting services you see. And finally, you guessed it, you document everything.
You know, at the end of the day, this whole process is about one thing: transforming overwhelming noise into a clear signal. We take that huge list and we forge it into a prioritized map, pointing us directly to the most promising and potentially vulnerable parts of our target's digital footprint.
So, now the recon is complete. The map is drawn, the key locations are all identified, and the landscape is clear. Your subdomain enumeration is done. The only question left is, what are you going to find inside?